I'm talking with Brian Foster, CTO of Damballa. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you very much.
Brian, in many ways, Damballa could be considered a pioneer in the advanced threat response space, if we're going to call it that. Tell me, a little bit of the history of Damballa, how you came to market, what you addressed, and where you are now.
Absolutely. Damballa was focused on finding infected devices on people's networks that basically were infections that got through the preventative layers that they had in place. And what I find most interesting about Damballa is the way that they've gone about doing that. And Damballa started, they really have two products, one that sits in the ISP space, one that sits in the enterprise space. But the ISP space, even though it's actually a smaller part of Damballa, it's where this kind of virtuous cycle comes from that enables what they do in the enterprise. And what I mean by that is, today Damballa sees, over half of your internet traffic in the United States every day. And metadata from that traffic comes back to our Hadoop cluster in Atlanta, Georgia, where we have a bunch of machine learning systems that data scientists from Georgia Tech, which is where the company started, have built ways to automatically identify network behavior and network traffic as either benign or malicious. And so we have this virtuous cycle where we sit in ISPs helping them find infected subscribers, and as part of that process we capture network data that then feeds these machine learning systems, which update our engines that go back in the ISP products to help find infected subscribers. And then we take those same engines and go put them in our enterprise product with a bunch of other engines that we build to do more or less the same thing in the enterprise, which is what assets of yours are infected or have the behaviors of being infected, assess the risk of those assets, pass it off to an incident responder to go deal with.
Does in which part of the business, it's almost two business units, right? Selling to the ISPs versus the enterprise. Which one of them is getting the most traction right now?
The enterprise business is growing the strongest and fastest. That's also where we're most focused, because when we think about things in terms of our addressable market, it's far larger on the enterprise side. There's a fixed number of ISPs, and as I said, we're already almost 60% actually like in broadband penetration in the U.S., 50% in mobile data penetration. And certainly we can go get more ISPs overseas, but there's a fixed number of those. There's a fixed number, obviously, in enterprises too, but there's far more. The other thing too is, on the ISP side, it's less of a focus on selling, it's more of a focus on partnering and finding ways to enable their business with our technology. Whereas in enterprise, it's a sell to, it's historical, traditional kind of B2B selling.
But with an ISP, you've gotten all that experience with the problem resolution. What do you do after you've detected that somebody's infected,
That's
which
right.
I presume translates into the enterprise model.
It does, absolutely. In the ISP space, this goes back to the partnering with the ISP. We give them a list, like in one of the cases, one of our largest customers where we're doing over 20 million concurrent users who are scanning, they're going to have a couple 100,000 infected users at any one moment. And so working with them on how you build notifications, and then for them it turns into also a business proposition, because those infected users can get sent to a landing page where they can either self-hygiene or do other things like that. So you're right. So you learn, how do you help these users get clean, and what are some of the steps you can take? And you take that in the enterprise setting where you don't have the scalability requirements that you do in an ISP setting, and you also can do more because of that. And that's where the risk settings, you can integrate with some of the tools that enterprises have to help them remediate faster. In fact, I like to say that our first job is to detect, prioritize via risk, and then accelerate response.
And what is the penetration looking like, and what typical markets are looking at you first?
We have about 100 enterprise customers today, and if I looked at it from the verticals that we're in, it's pretty evenly all across every vertical at this point. Historically, obviously very strong in the ISP setting space with our ISP product, but financial services, we have over 30 customers there, so that's one of our biggest segments. But also technology, have a lot of technology customers, media, entertainment. One of the interesting things about the way our product works is, because we're not a sandbox, we're not relying on an operating system. We're just relying on internet standard communication, which means we support any OS, any device. And so like media entertainment, which has historically had a higher penetration of Mac OS, for example, we've had a lot of media entertainment that early on purchased our solution instead of a sandbox like FireEye because of our cross OS support. So media entertainment's a big vertical for us. Education, once again, we come out of Georgia Tech, and we have a lot of universities that use our solution, and so forth. So we're pretty much an equal opportunity employer as far as verticals go.
Yep. Do you have foreknowledge before going into an enterprise about potentially infected machines that are already there because of your visibility in the backbone?
So my engineering team has some foreknowledge of who's infected, but we do not use that in a sales cycle at all. So we don't share that with the sales teams or what have you. There are occasions where, based on what we see, because we also operate some sinkholes and things like that, if we see a customer of ours that shows up in the sinkholes, we do, through our normal channels, through our customer relationships, talk to people about it. But we do not use that kind of as part of a new sales cycle. I'm not keen on that, using that as a way to get your foot in the door.
Right.
Yeah. So.
What does a trial look like? What does the enterprise have to deploy in order to determine if this is the way they're going?
Yeah. So we actually have a very sophisticated proof of concept process at Damballa. In fact, I spent 21 years at Symantec and 5 at Mac. This is probably the most sophisticated, well-run proof of concept machine I've ever seen inside of a company. It just happens to be a small company. But first thing we do with the customer is we make sure that there is a viable, this customer is really interested in the outcome of this proof of concept. You can't unsee what we're going to show you, you know what I mean? And we're very busy. We're obviously going to deploy an appliance in your network for a few weeks and spend some people on our side to make it. So we want to make sure that's worth your while and it's worth our while. So we do upfront do a lot of planning and a lot of work to make sure this is a legitimate opportunity. It's not just somebody that's just interested, for other than possibly a sales cycle. But once those kind of parameters are met, it's as simple as we plug an appliance into where we decide is a great spot to get visibility. For example, sometimes we might do retail, so we pick a store and say this store we're going to look at. Other parts, it may be, for large organizations, it might be a certain part of their organization. For mid-size, it may be the whole company. And we start finding interesting activity the minute that we attach to the network. But we typically let the thing run for 2 weeks to see what we see for 2 weeks, and then we go through a proof of concept finding report where, once again, we gather all the stakeholders, including the CISO or whoever the sponsor of this was, and we present to them the findings and what they meant. So it typically takes anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks for that process to go from start to finish. But once again, that findings report is very detailed. Everything we see, we talk about how did it get there, what does it mean, who's it coming from possibly, and then that typically once we get to that point, that feeds into a sales cycle.
Have you ever had to cut that whole process short because of the things you find?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it depends. We have some very interesting conversations, right? We've had CISOs get mad at us, for example, because, and actually, frankly, mad at their AV vendor because of what they see. But we've certainly seen some very accelerated sales cycles. One of the partnerships that Damballa does is actually very fruitful. Is we partner with companies like PwC and E&Y, and they use our product to do an assessment, and that has turned into some very quick sales cycles, because what's happened is, a company gets notified by a 3-letter agency that they've got a breach. They bring in E&Y to do an assessment. E&Y uses our products, finds hundreds of infected devices on the network, and sells their services to clean it up, and introduces a sales cycle for us, which ends up being pretty accelerated, and so forth. So sometimes those proof of concept findings turn into pretty quick sales cycles.
Is there truly a fear on the part of CISOs that you're going to make them look bad because you're going to find something? Or have they gotten over that because they've acknowledged that they're probably infected?
You run into some CISOs that, and I don't think it's frequent, but you do run into some that are worried about the optics of what we find as they go back to their CIO or to their board, saying I've already increased my budget this much, and I just installed a tool that found a lot of stuff that's already getting through. Yep. I would say that I am seeing more and more CISOs that are coming underneath that understanding that everybody is has infections that are getting through, and that's normal. I now need to figure out how do I find them before they become a breach.
Yep.
So. And
what is the process of you've found infections? How do you tell when a breach is imminent, or what stage it's at?
It depends on the type of malware. As you know, Richard, a lot of these breaches are kind of a supply chain of malware to get to the exfiltration of the data or to whatever the mission was for the breach. And to know where you're at, kind of in that supply chain or in that chain, depends on what kind of malware you're seeing, what type of activity you're seeing. Our product, after we do the detection that we've got something bad happening, we go through a risk assessment, and we look at risk 9 different ways. And some of those risk assessments are, are we in the exfiltration stage? Are we just still in reconnaissance and lateral movement stage? Some of that goes into the risk settings that we look at. And obviously, if you've got malware that's exfiltrating data, that ends up being a riskier piece of malware than something that's still, that hasn't gotten to that point yet.
And then when you're doing an assessment initially, yes, you're going to find things, but how much is banking Trojans and adware and stuff that's not a risk to the enterprise?
It's interesting. Some of our best sales cycles, we found one thing, and only one thing. And what's interesting about that was the thing that we found. And we've had people that had spent months cleaning up the network, making it pristine. They had their endpoints locked down, couldn't run anything. And the fact that we went in there and within a few minutes found one thing, woke them up, and we showed them how that one thing got there and what it was, and proved our value with one. We've had other examples where we found hundreds of pieces of adware, not that interesting, right? And so we do in our product, goes back to the risk setting. Adware is going to be far less risky and important than that one thing that could be hitting a valuable target or something like that in our product.
And Damballa still has some unique intelligence gathering that it does. Tell us a little bit more about those.
I refer to it, so a lot of our unique intelligence gathering is just gathering data from the ISPs. As I said earlier, we get over 50 billion passive DNS events a day that come into our Hadoop cluster that feed our machine learning and feed our intelligence generation efforts, if you will. And what's important about that, what I think is unique, is it's unfiltered network data. So I have a long history of building things like SIMs and things like that. And largely in the past, I've tried to build systems that collect logs out of security products and other things and try to make sense of them. And those are useful efforts. The challenge being, I'm grabbing logs from things security products knew to log, right? The nice thing about this being unfiltered network data is I'm not dropping anything. I'm seeing it all. There is no filter being applied to it before it goes to my machine learning systems. And that allows me that, I think, a little bit more pristine, unfiltered view that the systems run on that increase the efficacy of what we detect.
Well, just looking at DNS lookups is unique in itself.
That's true. Yeah.
Most look at the instrumentation of a sandbox or IP reputation.
That's right.
So,
that's right.
And DNS is giving a different purview.
It does. Our roots are DNS, and it's kind of interesting as a company. That's our heritage, and we have some of the best DNS-based detection technologies that are out there, with PhD theses behind them and peer-reviewed in academic circles, and it's proven effective in our products. And when you think about DNS and what DNS enables us to do is not just even knowing the domain names, it's the infrastructure behind it. So what we're able to do is not only give you a reputation on domain names, but give you reputation on the infrastructure that supports domain names, and actually start looking at how those two relate over time. And one of the things that we've done at Damballa is, we've done a really good job in the past of finding what I call noisy malware, which are bots and things like that. How do we take what we're good at and also start trying to find more targeted attacks? Well, one of the things that we figured out is that a lot of the targeted APT campaigns have domain names that only pop up for a very short period of time and they go away for long periods of time. So we're able to find that pattern in our DNS traffic where you see domains wake up, then go away for a long period of time, wake up. And that pattern starts allowing us to find APT actors and whatnot. And so once again, we're finding, because of this huge treasure trove of DNS data we have and this competence we have in dealing with it, we're finding new ways to catch even more targeted attacks using that technology.
I can see how even a completely targeted attack, which used a brand new domain name, that would immediately set up bells and whistles.
Absolutely, yeah. We look at, we have a domain reputation system's one of our engines, and it has like 50 odd features that it looks for. The age of the domain name is obviously one of those, and it's highly correlated to new domain name is going to probably lend itself to a lower reputation score for that domain, and the same is true for the IP address behind it.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Great. So what's the next phase of development for Damballa?
Damballa is focused kind of on kind of two paths forward, if you will. One of those is today we're on-premise appliances, and the next phase for us is to virtualize a lot of what we do. Part of that is on the ISP settings. You're seeing a lot of ISPs starting to virtualize their infrastructure as well, and since we're kind of part of that and we're a core component for some of that, we're going along that journey with them. So I'm spending a lot of my time there. That also, by the way, is also enabling us to do our product more in the cloud than on-prem as well, as they're kind of going in parallel. The second area, which I think is very interesting, is also extending. So I often talk about Damballa being a good north-south product, right? We're looking at what's coming out of your environment out to the internet and coming back in. And we're very good at that. How do I take that, turn it over, start looking east-west? Lateral movement of malware, insider threat, same approach, same competency I have, which is gathering data and applying machine learning to it. But now can I apply that to traffic going east-west? That's another area that we're focusing on over the next 12 months.
Great. Anything else I should have asked?
No, I mean, I think at Damballa we're seeing very happy customers, great opportunities to kind of with certainty find these infections in people's environments, and having a lot of fun.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Brian.
Anytime, Richard.